My son said, "Why are you making such a big deal, Mom? It's just a car." He took my keys without asking, drove off to meet his friends, came back late, and left it in a parking lot, empty tank, trash everywhere. No apology. Just walked past me like nothing happened. The next day, I asked him to run to the store for a few things, and I looked at him the way only a mother can, the kind of look that comes when patience finally runs out. If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. My name is Martha Lowell. I was 62 years old, and I still worked full-time as a senior bookkeeper at a private legal firm in the suburbs of Minneapolis. I had no plans to retire anytime soon. I liked the structure, the numbers, the predictability. After my husband passed away almost a decade ago, work gave me something to anchor to, something solid. I lived in the same house we had bought together 35 years earlier. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. A two-bedroom single story with a small porch, a trimmed lawn, and a magnolia tree that bloomed late every spring. I kept the gutters clean, scheduled my own roof inspections, and always knew where the flashlight was during a power outage. Everything had a place. That's how I liked it. There was one car in the driveway, a silver 2015 Toyota Camry that I had bought myself 3 years ago after trading in the older one we'd had since Tom's high school years. I picked it out for its reliability, good mileage, and smooth ride. I took care of it the same way I took care of everything else, meticulously, regular oil changes, vacuumed floors, a fresh vanilla-scented air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. That car wasn't just transportation. It was my independence, my routine, my space. My son Tom, 32, had moved back in temporarily about 6 months earlier. A breakup, a job layoff, some messy financial things he didn't like to talk about. It added up. I hadn't said no. I wasn't the type. He said it would be for a month or two at most. But months had come and gone, and he was still here, using the guest room like a hotel and the fridge like it was his. He paid no rent, occasionally helped with trash day. Mostly, he kept to himself, coming and going on his own time. I hadn't complained. I knew life didn't always go as planned. I figured a warm bed and a quiet house were better than him spiraling alone in some expensive one-bedroom with no food. But I had my limits, even if I didn't say them out loud. I needed my routines. I needed my peace. And most of all, I needed my boundaries. That car was part of it. Every morning, I'd get up at 6:15, shower, make myself a bowl of oatmeal, and sip my tea while the sun rose over the street. By 7:15, I'd be backing out of the driveway, heading toward the office. 22 minutes each way, never more than a few seconds off. The car was clean, quiet, familiar. It gave me something I couldn't get from people: predictability. No one else drove it, not even Tom. I never said it explicitly, but the expectation was clear. The keys stayed in a dish by the kitchen door. I never locked them away. I didn't feel the need to. That car was mine. I assumed naively that the unspoken line would be respected. I was wrong, but at the time, things still felt balanced. I kept track of my mileage. I scheduled my tire rotations. I filled the tank every Sunday after church and wiped the dash with a microfiber cloth. I even bought new seat covers when the old ones started to fray. They were dark blue with a subtle pattern, nothing flashy, just something that made the car feel like mine. Sometimes, when work got stressful or the house felt too quiet, I'd sit in the driveway for a few extra minutes with the engine off, watching the neighborhood wake up. It was my little world behind those windows. No noise, no obligations, just the hum of silence and the faint ticking of the cooling engine. So when I say it was just a car, I mean it the way people say a wedding ring is just a ring, or a family photo is just paper. It wasn't about the metal or the wheels or the make. It was about respect, ownership, control in a life where so much had been beyond mine. I had lost a husband. I had raised a child. I had worked through illnesses, layoffs, recessions, and grief. And through all of that, I had kept moving, carefully, quietly, with purpose. That car was part of that movement, part of the life I had built on my own terms. And I wasn't ready to watch someone treat it like an afterthought. Not him, not anyone. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I woke up the same way I always did, before my alarm, quietly, with the pale gray light creeping through the blinds. I slipped on my robe, made my tea, and walked into the kitchen, ready to start my routine. But when I glanced out the window above the sink, the driveway was empty. At first, I thought I'd forgotten something. Maybe I parked on the street. Maybe I left it at the grocery store by mistake. My mind scrambled to make sense of the gap where my car was supposed to be. But deep down, I knew. I knew before I even turned to look at the key dish by the door. It was empty. I stood there, the tea cooling in my hand, trying to push away the pit forming in my stomach. I waited. 10 minutes, 20, an hour. The house was still. His door was shut. No text, no note, just my own silence reflected back at me. He came back just after 9. I heard the car pull in before I saw him. The familiar engine hum, the crunch of tires on the driveway, the click of the car door closing with just a bit too much carelessness. Then the front door opened and he walked in like it was any other morning. He had a cup of coffee in one hand, sunglasses perched on his head, and his phone in the other. He didn't greet me. He didn't explain. He just nodded and moved past me toward the stairs. My car, my quiet sanctuary, was parked crookedly halfway across the driveway, nose out, driver's seat pushed too far back, a food wrapper on the passenger floor. I walked outside in my slippers, circled it slowly. There was a faint smell of fast food and cheap cologne. The gas tank was nearly empty. It felt like trespassing. I didn't say anything that day. I wish I could say I had confronted him with the anger I felt rising in my chest. But I didn't. I didn't yell or demand answers. I simply watched, observed, absorbed. Later that evening, I heard him laughing on the phone, telling someone about the meetup he'd gone to that morning, how convenient it had been to just take the car. I was standing in the hallway then, out of sight. I didn't move. I listened to the way he spoke about it like it meant nothing, like borrowing my car without permission was just a funny little anecdote, a footnote. It wasn't the first time Tom had blurred the lines between what was mine and what was his. He had been doing it in small ways since he moved back in, taking food without asking, using my laundry detergent, leaving lights on, doors unlocked, but this was different. This was my car. He had crossed a line, and he didn't even seem to realize it. Or worse, he did, and he didn't care. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped in my lap, staring at the shadowy outline of the Camry through my window. The longer I looked, the more foreign it felt, like something had been taken from me. Not just a vehicle, but a part of my autonomy, my privacy, my voice. It wasn't just the act that bothered me. It was the absence of remorse, the assumption, the sheer casual entitlement of it all. No apology, no offer to refill the tank, no acknowledgement that he'd even done anything out of line. Just a shrug, just silence. It made me think of all the other times I'd given space where I shouldn't have, all the moments I had bitten my tongue, all the times I had told myself, he's going through something, or it's not worth the argument. And in doing so, I had let parts of myself shrink. I had made room where I should have set boundaries. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was angry, but because I was done excusing, done absorbing, done being the woman who let people walk through her life without removing their shoes. It was just a car, he would say. But he didn't understand. It wasn't about the car. It was about what it represented. And that, I realized, was something I wasn't willing to surrender again. The next day, I went to work as if nothing had happened. I put on my slate gray cardigan, the one with the elbow patches that Charles used to tease me about, and I packed my lunch, chicken salad on rye, a sliced apple, and a thermos of tea. Everything looked normal. Everything felt rehearsed. But inside, something had shifted. I drove the Camry carefully, my hands tighter on the steering wheel than usual. I could still smell the faint trace of someone else's presence, cheap cologne, and that synthetic lemon scent from whatever air freshener Tom had used. The mirrors were adjusted wrong, the seat too far back. It wasn't damage, not physically, but it felt like a trespass, the kind you only notice when your comfort has been moved an inch to the left. All morning at the office, I kept replaying it. Not the act itself, but the indifference, the complete lack of hesitation. The way he had walked into the kitchen, still holding my keys like they belonged to him. The way he hadn't looked at me, hadn't said thank you or sorry, or even noticed that I had noticed. And suddenly, I couldn't focus on numbers, couldn't concentrate on invoices and spreadsheets and account balances. My mind kept circling around a single quiet question. How much of myself have I given away in the name of keeping the peace? I thought about how long I had been the one to bend. After Charles passed, I had made space for grief, for growth, for Tom. When he fell behind on bills, I paid them. When his apartment lease ended badly, I welcomed him home. I told myself that's what mothers do. We make room. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking if he was also making room for me. I sat at my desk during lunch, alone in the break room, and opened a blank notepad. I didn't plan to write anything. I just stared at the page. Then, without thinking, I wrote 3 words at the top. How much peace? I began to list the things I had sacrificed in silence. My evenings, my routines, my privacy, my sense of control, my boundaries, my rest, my car. And the more I wrote, the more I realized how long the list had grown. Not overnight, slowly, subtly, through small moments that seemed harmless on their own. I tore the paper from the pad and folded it once. I didn't know what I would do with it, but I kept it in my purse. After work, I didn't drive home immediately. I stopped at a gas station and filled the tank, something Tom hadn't bothered to do. Then I sat there for several minutes, my car idling, the engine soft beneath me. I looked at the steering wheel, the dashboard, the GPS screen that still had someone else's destination typed in. I deleted it and closed the map. That's when the thought came to me. A question, quiet but firm. What if I just sold it? It didn't come with anger. It came with clarity. That car had been mine, a symbol of my control, my reliability, my independence. But if someone else could take it without asking, without consequence, then what did it actually represent anymore? What was its value if it didn't also protect my peace? So I went home and opened my laptop. I went to one of those buy-sell platforms. Simple, straightforward. I typed in the make, model, year. I uploaded pictures I had on my phone from when I last washed it. I filled in the mileage, the condition, the service records. I left out the part about the son who didn't ask permission. The suggested price popped up on the screen. It was a fair number, more than I expected, actually. I stared at it for a while. Then I set it slightly lower. Not because I was desperate, but because I didn't want this to drag out. I posted the listing with a simple title, 2015 Toyota Camry, one owner, excellent condition. That was it. No frills, no explanation, just a truth I was finally ready to act on. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of the house. I could hear the TV from the other room, Tom watching some loud, fast show he didn't think I understood. I didn't tell him what I'd done. I didn't need to, not yet. That night, I slept better than I had in months. It turns out peace does have a price, and sometimes it starts with an online listing. By the time the sun came up the next morning, my inbox already had 3 inquiries. 2 were automated messages from the platform confirming the listing. The third was from a man named Evan, who asked if he could come see the car that afternoon. He said he liked the mileage, appreciated the service record I'd posted, and mentioned that he was looking for a reliable vehicle for his daughter. I stared at his message for a few seconds before replying. I gave him a time and my address, asked him to park across the street. I didn't know why I added that last part. Maybe I wasn't ready for Tom to see a stranger walking around his ride. He left for the gym late that morning, earbuds in, bottle in hand, barely saying a word. He never even glanced at the car sitting in the driveway, freshly washed and polished the night before. He didn't know what was coming, and I didn't feel guilty. After he left, I pulled the car out into the sunlight and wiped it down again. I vacuumed the floors, wiped the dashboard, cleaned the fingerprints off the windows, his fingerprints. Then I sat in the driver's seat and checked the glove box. Insurance documents, manual, the copy of the title. Everything was where it should be. Everything in its place, just like I liked it. When Evan arrived, I watched from the front porch for a moment before meeting him in the driveway. He looked exactly like his message suggested, polite, middle-aged, practical. He brought his daughter along, a girl who looked barely 20, her hair in a loose ponytail and a nervous smile on her face. She reminded me of myself when I bought my first car. Young, careful, grateful. They walked around the vehicle, asked a few questions. I answered all of them calmly. They wanted to test drive it, so I sat in the passenger seat while Evan took the wheel and his daughter sat in the back. The ride was smooth. The engine, quiet. Everything worked the way it always had. I watched him nod as he drove, listened to her whisper, "It smells really clean." When we got back to the house, he didn't haggle. He offered me the full asking price in cash in an envelope. I didn't blink. I took it. We signed the documents on the hood. I handed over the keys and stood back as they pulled out of the driveway. She waved to me from the window. I waved back, and then they were gone. The driveway looked strange after that. Not empty, free, open. I stood there for a long moment, holding the envelope in both hands. I didn't count the money right away. I didn't need to. I knew it was right. Inside, I placed the envelope in the drawer with my checkbooks. Then I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel spiteful. What I felt was clean, clear, resolved. I imagined Tom walking through the front door later that evening, tossing his bag on the floor like he always did, heading to the kitchen, maybe asking what was for dinner. He'd glance out the window, expecting the silver car in its usual spot. He'd pause, do a double take, walk outside, then come back in. He would ask the question I had been waiting for, and I already knew the answer. He didn't ask permission when he took what wasn't his, so I didn't ask permission to take it back. After they drove away, I stood in the living room staring out the window at the empty street. The absence of my car didn't jar me. It didn't make my stomach twist or my heart race. Instead, it felt like something had finally been lifted, a quiet burden I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. There was no regret, no fear, just relief. Deep, clean relief, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a shawl when you didn't even know you were cold. I sat at the kitchen table, hands curled around a cup of cooling tea, and looked at the envelope lying before me. It was plain, unassuming, but it felt like it hummed with power. I hadn't counted the money yet. I didn't need to. This wasn't about dollars. This was about the decision, the follow-through, the boundary finally drawn and honored, not by him, but by me. That envelope didn't just contain cash. It contained a declaration that I was done making space for people who took me for granted, that I was done living around someone else's disregard, that I had reclaimed something no one had the right to borrow: my voice, my limits, my self-respect. I didn't rush to the bank. I didn't make a list of next purchases. I simply breathed in the space that was finally mine, no longer tethered to the constant worry of whether I'd wake up to find my life rearranged without consent, no longer wondering when the next small theft of trust would happen under the guise of just borrowing. Later that afternoon, I went to the entryway. The bowl where I had always kept the car keys sat on the little table by the door. I picked it up, turned it in my hands, and wiped away the thin layer of dust at the bottom. It felt like a relic from a version of me I no longer wanted to be. I moved it to a shelf in the back room and replaced it with a ceramic dish my sister had given me on a whim years ago, a shallow bowl painted with tiny blue leaves. Decorative, empty, mine. I found the spare keys, the ones I had kept tucked away behind the pantry door for emergencies. They jingled softly in my hand like they were asking permission to be forgotten. I opened the drawer of my desk, set them inside, and slid it shut. No lock, no ceremony, just finality. Tom came home a few hours later. I was folding laundry on the couch, the television murmuring softly in the background. I didn't stop what I was doing when he walked in. I heard the front door open, the usual rustle of a grocery bag he'd picked up on the way. Then his steps paused. He looked out the window, then back toward the driveway, then, finally, toward me. "Where's the car?" I didn't flinch. I didn't sigh. I didn't even look up. "I sold it." He stood still for a few seconds longer than he needed to, processing, calculating. His brow furrowed, but not in anger, just disbelief. "You didn't tell me." I looked up then, met his eyes without blinking. "I didn't need to." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't argue. He didn't ask who bought it or how much I got. He just stood there, then turned and walked upstairs. His door closed with a quiet finality I hadn't heard in months. I made dinner for one: a baked sweet potato, some steamed vegetables, and a cup of ginger tea. I ate slowly, mindfully, without noise, without rush. That night, the house felt different, as if the walls had expanded again, breathing easier without the weight of unspoken tension pressing against them. I sat in the living room with my knitting. The windows cracked open to let in the scent of pine trees and the faint smoky aroma of a neighbor grilling 2 houses down. It was the first night in years I didn't run through mental checklists or brace for interruptions. And when I finally went to bed, I slept all the way through. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I put on my walking shoes and a windbreaker and left the house just as the sky began to blush pink. I walked a full loop through the neighborhood, passing quiet houses and dew-soaked lawns. I stopped at the local market on the way back, buying just enough to fill a canvas bag. It was light, manageable. It felt like freedom. As I walked home, I thought about how for so long I had believed independence was about possession, ownership, control. But now I understood something else. Independence was about agency, the power to decide what stayed in your life and what didn't. That car had once given me freedom, but selling it had given me something far better. It reminded me that I was allowed to choose, and no one, not even the people you love, gets to make that choice for you. It took him almost a full day to notice the car was gone. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. The car wasn't a tool he depended on. It was a convenience he assumed would always be there. Like electricity, like a full fridge, like me. The morning started quietly. I followed my usual rhythm. Coffee brewed in its steady drip. Toast browned just right. The newspaper folded on the table in perfect thirds. I trimmed the yellow leaves from the plants on the windowsill, humming faintly to myself as I moved through the house. The breeze drifted through the open window in the front room, carrying the scent of cut grass and faint traffic from the main road. The driveway outside sat bare, exposed under the soft morning light. I looked at it briefly, then went back to sipping my coffee. I expected he'd come down eventually and notice, that there'd be a moment, a pause, something. But the morning passed and he didn't appear. It wasn't until almost noon that I heard movement upstairs. A muffled yawn, the groan of floorboards under heavy steps, then the soft impact of his socks hitting the stairs. He entered the kitchen without looking at me. He opened the fridge like he always did, pulled out the carton of orange juice, drank straight from it. No glass, no manners. He shut the fridge with his shoulder and glanced toward the hallway. He reached for the doorknob. That's when it happened. The stillness. He froze. He looked out, and for the first time in a long while, he noticed something that didn't belong to him was no longer there. Where's the car? The question hung in the air, suspended between us like a dropped thread. His tone wasn't angry, not yet. It was confused, disoriented, as though the universe had shifted in a way he couldn't quite process. He looked back at me, waiting for a correction, some assurance that what he was seeing was wrong. I lifted my eyes from the crossword puzzle. I sold it. 3 words, no drama, no apology, just the truth. His brows creased. He blinked. You what? I sold the car, I said again, slowly, clearly. He stood there, mouth half open, as if he were trying to read my expression for a clue. His hands hovered at his sides, caught between protest and disbelief. You're joking, he said, his voice just a touch louder. I didn't answer. You didn't even tell me? I put my pencil down on the table, folding my hands. No, I said, I didn't. He stepped farther into the room, his shoulders squared, the beginnings of indignation starting to rise in his posture. What, because I borrowed it once? He said borrowed, not took, not used without asking. Borrowed, as if it had been agreed upon, as if that word could erase the disrespect of assumption. I needed it, he added. It's not like I wrecked it or anything. I nodded once. No sarcasm, no lecture, just acknowledgement. Then I picked up my pencil and returned to my puzzle. He lingered. I could feel his presence like a static charge in the air, waiting for something, a fight, a guilt trip, a compromise, but none of that came, not this time. Eventually, he muttered something under his breath and stomped upstairs. The sound of his door closing reverberated down the hall like a statement. I filled in 3 more words on the crossword before I stopped again. I took a deep breath and looked at the empty key dish by the door. It looked cleaner now, less cluttered, less claimed. In the afternoon, I heard him talking in his room. His voice was low, clipped, strained. He was on the phone, likely scrambling to figure out a ride, asking for a favor, making arrangements now that the assumption of my support was no longer a given. He didn't come down for dinner. I didn't call him. I cooked for one. I ate at the table with the lamp on low, jazz humming faintly from the old radio in the corner. I didn't wrap up a plate for later. I didn't wait. Later that evening, I stepped outside onto the porch. The sun had dipped below the trees, and the sky had turned that soft blue-gray of late summer evenings. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me feel invisible. But now it felt full, still, mine. The driveway stretched out beside me like a canvas finally cleared. I stared at it and felt no urge to fill it too soon. Empty didn't mean lacking. Sometimes it meant ready. And as I sat there with a warm mug between my hands, I realized something that had been forming for weeks. It had never really been about the car. It had been about being seen, being asked, being valued enough to have a say in my own life. And now, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reclaiming space. I was reclaiming permission, the kind you give to others and the kind you finally give to yourself. The silence between us stretched like a taut wire, humming low and constant. It wasn't the kind that threatens to explode into shouting matches or slamming doors. No, this silence was more potent than that, calm, unspoken, and devastating in its clarity. The air felt thinner, the walls more spacious, as if the house had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. He avoided me. I let him. I didn't ask where he was going, didn't ask if he'd eaten, didn't remind him about rent, chores, or responsibility. I stopped checking if he needed something from the grocery store or asking about the job hunt he pretended to be on. I stopped softening my steps to make him comfortable. I simply started living, fully, unapologetically, for myself. And the strangest part? I didn't miss the old rhythm. In fact, I barely noticed it was gone. I reasserted my routines like a woman returning to her own skin. The kitchen became mine again. The way I liked the salt facing the stove and the dish towels folded in thirds, not crumpled on a hook. I changed the living room back, removed the clutter, replaced the throw pillows, opened the curtains he always kept drawn. The house grew brighter each day, not because of sunlight, because of intention. I reclaimed spaces, not as territory from someone else, but as belonging I had slowly forfeited over time. I reorganized my closet. I lit candles in the evening and played classical music while I cooked. I started taking walks early in the morning before the world stirred, breathing in air that hadn't yet been touched by anyone's demands. It wasn't rebellion, it was restoration. And he noticed. One evening, I was folding laundry at the dining table. The room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of cloth and hands. He appeared in the doorway, hesitant, like a boy who'd walked into a room he wasn't sure he belonged in anymore. He asked if I needed help. His voice lacked its usual edge. It was small, uncertain. I looked up at him, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something besides entitlement. I saw someone who realized they might have gone too far. I said no, and I meant it. He didn't argue. He didn't insist. He simply nodded, as if some part of him understood that the rules of this house, of this relationship, had changed. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the faint movement of shadows from the trees outside, tracing lines across the walls. I thought about all the moments I had given away, the slow drip of accommodation disguised as kindness, The times I'd excused his behavior under the banner of being a good mother. But a good mother doesn't teach her child that love means permission to overstep. The truth was, I wasn't angry about the car. I was angry about the pattern, about the way I had been chiseled away in fragments until only function remained. Driver, cook, listener, provider. A mother, yes, but no longer a woman with boundaries. And I had allowed it. The moment he took the car without asking wasn't an isolated offense. It was the echo of every dismissed voice, every assumed yes. It was the mirror held up to my own silence. I resented myself for how long I had tolerated it, for mistaking tolerance for patience, for allowing dependency to masquerade as love. The next morning, I watched him shuffle around the kitchen, the stiffness in his shoulders betraying how much he didn't want to ask for another favor. And I felt something new: resolve. Later that week, I told him I wanted him to find a new place to live. No buildup, no preamble, just the words, clear and even. He looked at me like I'd just shifted the axis of his world. "You're serious?" he asked. I nodded, not with cruelty, with clarity. He didn't fight me. He just stood there, stunned. Because deep down, I think he knew it was coming. I had drawn a line that was no longer in pencil. We didn't speak much after that, but we didn't need to. He started looking for places, making calls in hushed tones. The tension didn't spike. It dissolved, because decisions, once made, carry their own peace. In the quiet that followed, I walked through my home and felt the space change. It wasn't about square footage. It was about air that no longer carried the weight of resentment. And I realized it had never just been about the car. It was about dignity. It was about being seen as a whole person, not just a giver. It was about protecting the life I had built with hands that deserved to rest, not constantly repair. It was about finally choosing myself and meaning it. The morning after he moved out, the house was so still that I could hear the sound of the clock ticking in the hallway. But it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the kind that settles after a long-awaited decision has finally been made. A silence that fills the walls not with absence, but with presence. Mine? I stood in the kitchen barefoot, the morning light slanting through the blinds, and let the quiet fill me. I sat at the table with a fresh cup of coffee and felt something I hadn't in years: possibility. There was no sadness, no aching nostalgia, no guilt. I had grieved already, in small daily ways, each time I'd been disregarded, overlooked, dismissed. That kind of grief was over. What remained was peace. I didn't cry when he left. I didn't replay the final words we exchanged or doubt my firmness. I had said what needed to be said. He had heard it. And for once, he hadn't tried to talk me out of it. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, I knew the space was mine again. Not just the physical space, but the emotional and mental one I had surrendered far too often. The driveway had been empty for weeks now. At first, it felt like a wound, a gap where something used to be. But now it felt like a clean slate, a beginning. Not a loss, but a readiness. I looked out at it that morning and, without hesitation, made up my mind. That afternoon, I went to the dealership. I didn't take a friend. I didn't ask for opinions. I didn't text anyone for backup. I walked in alone, wearing my favorite jacket, lipstick that made me feel elegant, and the confidence that comes with knowing what you don't want. I told the salesman I was looking for something compact, reliable, quiet, and simple. Something that didn't try to tell me how to drive or beep at me for breathing wrong. Something that was mine from the first ignition. He showed me a few models, but I saw it right away. A deep green hybrid, sleek, but unpretentious, with dark fabric seats and a clean dash. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It had a steady presence, like it knew who it was and didn't care to explain itself. I test drove it with the windows open. The breeze tousled my hair. I didn't turn on the radio. I listened to the quiet of the engine, the feeling of moving forward on my own terms. I didn't need convincing. I didn't ask questions to delay the inevitable. I bought the car. When I signed the papers, I felt like I was signing more than a sales contract. I was signing a declaration to myself. I will not be taken for granted again. I will not hand over what's mine just to keep the peace. I will no longer confuse tolerance with love. They gave me 2 keys. At home, I placed one in the drawer of my nightstand, behind a photo of my younger self laughing in the sun. The other, I clipped onto a soft leather keychain, the one I'd bought years ago but never used because it felt too nice for daily errands. Not anymore. That key now symbolized more than access to a vehicle. It represented control, direction, ownership of my life. That evening, I stood in the driveway and looked at my new car under the porch light. It didn't need to roar. It didn't need to sparkle. It just had to be mine. And it was. Later, I went inside, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and sat in the living room with a notebook I hadn't opened in years. I wrote a list, not of groceries, not of chores, but of dreams. Things I'd stopped admitting I wanted. At the top, I wrote, "Find love again." Not because I needed someone to complete me, but because I wanted to share this new life with someone who saw me fully. A partner who didn't expect me to dim myself to make room for them. Someone who asked, listened, stayed present. Someone who didn't reach for my keys without looking me in the eye first. I wrote more. Travel somewhere I've never been. Eat dinner in a restaurant alone and enjoy it. Learn to dance again. Wear red. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for life to happen. I was already living it. The next morning, I took the long route to the grocery store. I stopped by the lake, parked beneath a tree, and stepped out barefoot onto the grass. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the scent of pine and wind. I took a photo, not to post, not to prove, but to remember what it felt like to stand still and feel full. When I got back into the car, I ran my hand over the steering wheel and smiled. No wrappers in the footwell, no cigarette smell, no moved seat, just me, sitting exactly where I chose to be. No one drives off in my life without asking again, and if someone does ask, this time I get to decide if they're worth the ride.